Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to walk through how we solve multi-step equations. So really what we're doing here is building on our two-step equation notes and just learning how to handle it when we have, really what we're adding is distributing and combining like terms. So when we're solving equations, here are the steps we generally go through. The first thing we're going to look for is if we need to distribute. And we'll know we need that if we have parentheses. So that's what we're going to look for first. The next thing we're going to do is combine any like terms. Now, I'm going to make a note here. We're going to combine like terms if they're on the same side of the equal sign. And we'll look at an example of exactly what that means in a minute. The next thing we're going to do is add or subtract. And then the last piece here is going to be to multiply or divide. All right, so let's take a look at our example and see how these steps would apply. So the first thing I'm going to do is check to see if I need to distribute. And I notice here that I have some parentheses, so I'm going to need to distribute for my first step. So we know distributing is multiplication. I'm going to draw my line down here so I keep my work organized. I know I'm going to do 3 times x, which is 3x. 3 times a positive 4 is a positive 12. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring down my 2x. And I know over here I'm still equal to 37. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, obviously in this case, all my variables are on the left side of the equal sign here. And I notice that I have this positive 2x and I have a positive 3x term. Since those like terms are on the same side of the equal sign, I'm going to go ahead and combine them by adding their coefficients. So here I have 3 plus 2 is going to give me a positive 5x. And I'm going to add 12. And over here, I haven't done anything on the right side yet. I'm just going to keep copying that down. Now, the nice thing, once we get here, we're just back to our regular two-step equation. So we know the first thing we need to do is to add or subtract, so I get rid of this constant term here. So since this is a positive 12, I need to do the inverse, which is subtraction. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 12 on both sides. 12 minus 12 is 0, so that term drops out, and I'm left with 5x here. On this side, 37 minus 12 is going to give me 25. Now, to completely isolate the variable, here I have 5 times x, so I'm going to do the inverse operation, which is dividing by 5. And I'm going to get x is equal to 5. Now, I feel pretty good about my answer, but again, I always like to go back and check that my work is correct. So I'm just going to show my check step down here. Again, to check it, I copy my original equation. And now, every time I see x, I'm going to substitute 5. So here I have 2 times 5. Plus 3 times the quantity. Now again, instead of x, I'm going to plug in 5. And now I'm just going to use my calculator to check that I did this correctly. So I'm going to plug it in just how it looks on my page with parentheses and everything. So 2 times 5 plus 3 times the quantity, 5 plus 4. And I get 37, which is what I wanted to. And I know that my answer is correct. Again, it doesn't take much time, but it'll make sure that you actually got the answer you wanted. So I'm going to go through a couple examples here. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the examples. We'll save a few to go through in class, but this should give you a pretty good idea of what to expect. So let's go ahead and look at problem number 1. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is look for parentheses to decide if I need to distribute. I notice here there's no parentheses, so I'm going to make a note that we don't need to distribute in this case. It's not that I just skipped that step, but we actually don't need to distribute because we don't have any parentheses. So now I'm going to check. All my variables are on the left side here. I'm going to check step 2 said to combine like terms on the same side of the equal sign. So I notice here I have a positive 8x and a minus 3x. Again, we have to be really careful of those signs. When I combine those, I'm subtracting the coefficients, 8 minus 3, which is going to give me 5x. I'm going to bring down the minus 10, and I'm going to bring down the 20. So now I need to either add or subtract. Actually, let me make a note here that in the blue we combined 8x and a negative 3x. Okay, for my next step, since this is a minus 10, I'm going to add a 10 on both sides. And I'm going to say add 10 because that's addition is the inverse of subtraction. So when I do that on both sides, these terms are going to cancel, and I get 5x is equal to 30. So the last thing now I need to do is to divide by 5. So I'm going to make a note to divide by 5. And again, that's because division is the inverse of multiplication. And so when I do that, these terms are going to, or the coefficients are going to cancel, and I get x is equal to 6. Let's go ahead and do a quick check. I'm going to copy my original 8x minus 3x minus 10 is equal to 20. Wherever I have an x, I'm going to replace the 6. And then again, just like before, I'm just going to put that in my calculator exactly as I see it. So 8 times 6 minus 3 times 6 minus 10, and that does give me 20. Okay, we'll skip number 2 for now because it's very similar to the one that we just did. Let's look at, we'll do numbers 3 and 4. So let's start with number 3. Now the reason I want to start here is because I see a lot going on here, so I want to make sure we're keeping up with all our steps. So remember, the first step we said is if we see any parentheses, we need to go ahead and distribute first. So in this case, I'm distributing the negative 2, and I'm distributing that to the x and to the 6. So a negative 2 times x is a negative 2x. A negative 2 times a positive 6 is a negative 12. And I'm going to bring down my 7x and my 23. Once we've distributed, we've removed those parentheses, then we can go ahead and look for like terms. So I see I have a positive 7x and a minus 2x. For some reason, these are all coming out to 5s. So 7 minus 2 gives me a positive 5x. I'm going to bring down my minus 12 and my 23. Now again, we're back to just that two-step equation. So since I see subtraction here, I know I need to do the inverse, which is addition. These terms cancel out, and I get 5x is equal to 35. So now to isolate the variable, to get that all by itself, since this is multiplication, I'm going to undo that multiplication by dividing. And I get x is equal to 7. Quick check here. I copy down the original equation, and again, this is just because I want to make sure before I move on that I've done the problem correctly. It's a really easy way to make sure that you've gotten the problem correct. So 7 times 7 minus 2, again there's that x, so I replace it with 7, and then I just let my calculator do the hard work for me. And I get 23, which is what I wanted, so I know I've done it correctly. Again, if you were to check and this were not equal to 23, that would be your signal to go back to your work and find where your mistake was. All right, we're going to do one more together, and I'm actually going to show you two different ways to do this problem. So let's look at number 4. I notice here that I have parentheses. So my first step told me that I should distribute to get rid of those parentheses. Now, here's where I'm going to use my calculator. Your calculator can do fractions. What you need to do is hit the alpha button first, and then the y equals. And you'll get a menu that looks like this. You're going to hit enter, and that's going to allow you to enter that fraction. So when I'm distributing, I know I'm multiplying, so I have 3/2 times 3, which gives me 9/2. So I have 9/2 x. Now again, I'm going to do alpha, put that in the window there, y equals, and I'm going to do 3/2 times, in this case, I'm multiplying by 5, and I get a positive 15/2. Now, in this case, I don't have any like terms on this side of the equation. This has an x, and this is a constant, so I'm going to skip that step and go ahead and move my constant here using the inverse. Since this is plus 15/2, I'm going to subtract 15/2 on both sides. And again, I know this looks kind of crazy now, but we're going to really use our calculator to help us out here. So if I enter this in my calculator, I have a negative. Remember that negative button is all the way down here on our calculator. So I have negative 24. Then I'm subtracting, and I'm going to use my alpha y equals to put that fraction in, minus 15/2. Which gives me a negative 63/2. Now, for my last step, what I have here is a fraction times my variable. In order to undo that, I could divide by 9/2, but what I like to do here is I like to multiply by that reciprocal, because then I know these are going to cancel each other out. So on this side, I'm going to do the same thing. So I get x is equal to, and now I'm just going to, again, use my calculator. Let's see, I've got a negative, so I put that in first. Then alpha y equals, I've got 63/2, and I'm going to multiply that, again, my alpha y equals, times 2/9. And that gives me a negative 7. Now, especially because this one was so tricky, I really want to check that I got it right. So I have 3/2 times 3. Now here I have to be careful. This is multiplication again, so I'm going to use another set of parentheses here. And I want to check that it equals negative 24. So I'm going to enter it in my calculator just like you see it. Alpha y equals, I have 3/2. 3, I have another set of parentheses, plus 5, and I get negative 24, so I know I'm correct. Actually, for now, I think that's enough. When we come back to class, I'll show you another way of tackling this problem that some of you may prefer, and we'll finish the other examples as well. So make sure you've taken nice, detailed